The first time. My own son. The child I carried for 9 months and brought into this world with my own blood and tears. Raised his fist toward me. I saw my father smile. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of the devil claiming another soul. Sitting here now, on my porch in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at 75 years old, watching Sam tend to his tomatoes in our small garden, I can hardly believe that these same hands once trembled as they shielded my face from blows delivered by my own flesh and blood. Anyone looking at this scene would see nothing but tranquility. They would never guess that the woman sitting here once crawled her way out of a hell disguised as family. Detroit in the early 1972nd, still hummed with the promise of prosperity. I was 22 when I met Frank Kowalski at a church social. All wide eyes and dreams of a white picket fence. He was 25. Tall and broad-shouldered, with thick dark hair and a smile that made my knees weak. Frank swept me off my feet with his old-world charm and protective nature. Within 6 months, we were engaged. Within a year, we were married at St. Dion. Stanislaus. The early signs were subtle, disguised as love and concern. Frank didn't like when I spent time with girlfriends from work. When I mentioned wanting to keep working after we married, his jaw tightened. He told me no wife of his would need to work, that he would provide for everything. It felt romantic then, this desire to shelter and protect me. Our first son Leo arrived 11 months after our wedding, followed by Vincent 2 years later. Then Marcus and Danny, in quick succession. Frank's protective nature evolved into something more controlling. He managed all our finances, giving me a weekly allowance for groceries. When I asked to see bank statements, he would pat my head like I was a child and tell me not to worry about such complicated matters. The arguments started small, but grew more frequent and intense. Frank expected dinner on the table at exactly 6 o'clock, regardless of whether the children were sick or I was overwhelmed. When I tried to maintain friendships with other young mothers, Frank would find reasons why I couldn't visit or have them over. One by one, I found myself isolated, with only Frank and the children for company. The night that changed everything happened on a cold February evening in 1978. Frank had been laid off from Ford 3 weeks earlier and spent his days drinking beer and watching television, growing more bitter with each rejection letter. That evening, I had stretched our dwindling grocery budget to make his favorite pot roast, hoping to lift his spirits. Frank came to the table already angry. The roast wasn't cooked to his liking. The potatoes were too soft. When I gently suggested he lower his voice so he wouldn't wake the baby, Frank slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the dishes jump. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper as he told me exactly what he thought of wives who didn't know their place. But words weren't enough that night. Frank's hand came down across my face with a crack that silenced the room. I sat there with my cheek burning, tasting blood, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't love. This wasn't protection. This was domination wrapped in the language of marriage and family duty. The violence didn't end that night. It became Frank's primary method of maintaining control. Always, when the children were present, he would hit me for overcooking dinner, for spending too much at the grocery store, for speaking to neighbors, for any perceived slight to his authority. I tried to leave twice during those years. The first time, I took the children to my mother's house, but Helen believed strongly in the sanctity of marriage. She convinced me that Frank was just going through a hard time, that a good wife stands by her husband. The second time, I made it to the Greyhound station downtown, with the children and our meager savings. But standing there with 4 small children, no job, no credit in my name, and nowhere to go, the reality overwhelmed me. Frank found us there 3 hours later, promising things would be different. Frank died in an industrial accident at the plant on a rainy Thursday morning in October 1982. I should have felt nothing but grief. But sitting in that hospital waiting room, I felt something else mixed in with the sorrow. Relief. Terrible. Guilty relief that the fear was finally over. 2 weeks after Frank's funeral, my father, Arthur, wanted to move in with us. Helen had always managed Arthur's difficult tendencies, but without her gentle influence, he had become increasingly bitter and controlling. Arthur arrived with 3 suitcases and an attitude that immediately set my nerves on edge. He was 68 years old, carrying a grudge against the world that seemed to focus particularly on women. Arthur began working on my sons, filling their heads with ideas about women's proper place and men's natural authority. He would gather Leo and Vincent in the backyard for man-to-man talks, sending my daughters Clara and Grace inside to help with household chores. He told the boys stories about their father's strength and authority, explaining that as the men of the family now, it was their responsibility to make sure I understood my role. Leo, at 10 years old, began correcting me when I made decisions about household matters. Vincent started refusing to clean his room or help with chores, declaring that such work was for women. When I tried to discipline them, Arthur would intervene, explaining that their mother was just confused and needed patient guidance. Arthur convinced me to put Frank's life insurance money into an account he could help me manage. He explained that women weren't naturally suited for financial decisions, that I would be taken advantage of by unscrupulous men who preyed on widows. He began giving me a weekly allowance, requiring detailed receipts for every purchase. The boys absorbed these lessons eagerly, sensing the power that came with their grandfather's approval. They began monitoring my activities, reporting back to Arthur when I spoke too long with neighbors or spent money on anything they deemed unnecessary. My daughters watched with growing confusion and distress. The physical violence started gradually. Leo began pushing me when he was frustrated, mimicking the way Frank used to assert his dominance. When I told him that pushing was never acceptable, Arthur demonstrated by grabbing my wrist hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises, showing Leo the proper way to communicate authority. Vincent followed his older brother's example, but with more enthusiasm and less restraint. When I asked him to turn down the television so I could help Grace with her homework, Vincent responded by shoving me hard enough to make me stumble backward into the wall. Arthur just nodded approvingly from his chair. The final breaking point came on a snowy evening in January. I had discovered that Arthur had taken my mother's wedding ring from my jewelry box, intending to sell it. When I confronted him, demanding he return the only thing I had left of her, Arthur's mask finally slipped completely. He told me that everything in this house belonged to the men of the family now. The argument that followed was the worst we'd ever had. Vincent and Leo were drawn by the noise, and seeing their grandfather's rage, they decided to join in. Vincent ran to the kitchen and returned with a heavy cast-iron skillet, his face twisted with an expression of hatred I had never seen on such a young face. When I tried to step between Vincent and my cowering daughters, the boy swung the pan with all his strength. The iron connected with my forearm as I raised it to protect my head, and I heard something crack. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, shooting from my wrist to my shoulder like liquid fire. I collapsed to my knees, cradling my injured arm against my chest. But it wasn't the physical pain that finally broke me. It was the look on Arthur's face as I knelt on that kitchen floor. He was smiling with genuine pleasure. In that moment, I understood that this man, my own father, took joy in my suffering. He had successfully poisoned my sons against me, turning them into weapons he could use to maintain control. Something fundamental died in me that night. The last remnants of the dutiful daughter, the submissive wife, the accommodating mother simply ceased to exist. As I sat on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m, splinting my broken arm with a wooden spoon and medical tape, I made a decision that would change everything. I contacted Sergeant William Sullivan, a man who had served with Frank and had always treated me with respect. When I called him and explained our situation, Sarge listened without judgment and immediately offered help. The plan came together slowly. Sarge would pick us up at midnight on a Friday, when Arthur and the boys would be deep in their weekly ritual of beer and television. On the chosen Friday evening, I prepared Arthur's favorite beef stew, taking extra care to make it rich and satisfying. I ground several sleeping pills into powder and mixed them thoroughly into the portion I served to the 3 males in the house. Clara and Grace ate sandwiches instead. By 11 o'clock, Arthur was snoring in his recliner, and both boys were passed out in their beds. I moved through the house like a ghost, gathering our most important possessions: birth certificates, social security cards, my mother's ring, which I found hidden in Arthur's dresser drawer, and a small amount of cash I had been saving secretly. Before we left, I stood in the doorway of the boys' room, looking at Leo and Vincent, sleeping peacefully. I placed a soft kiss in the air above each of their heads, whispering an apology they couldn't hear. Sarge was waiting at the end of the block in his old Buick. As we pulled away from Corktown Street, I didn't look back at the house where I had spent 12 years of my life. There was nothing behind us worth remembering. The next morning, Sarge returned to Detroit with 3 of his veteran friends. They didn't go to threaten or intimidate, but simply to deliver a message. If Arthur or the boys attempted to find us or cause us any trouble, Sarge and his friends would consider it a personal matter requiring their immediate attention. Starting over at 37 with 2 young daughters and no resources was terrifying, but also liberating. Ann Arbor felt like a different world from Detroit, more open and accepting. I found work as a cook at a small restaurant near campus, taking pride in feeding hungry college students who treated me with respect. Clara and Grace flourished in their new environment. Away from the toxic influence of their grandfather and brothers, they began to blossom into confident, capable young women. Within a year, we had moved into our own small apartment above a bookstore on Liberty Street. When the elderly owner Ruth decided to retire, Sarge helped me secure a small loan, and I became the proud owner of Chapter and Verse Books. The transformation from victim to business owner didn't happen overnight, but each small success built upon the last. The store became a gathering place for students and faculty, a warm space where ideas were shared over coffee and conversation. It was in the bookstore that I met Sam Peterson, a gentle man who taught music at the university. Sam had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier and understood the complicated nature of grief and healing. Our friendship developed slowly, built on shared books and long conversations. When Sam finally asked me to dinner, I felt excitement tempered with wisdom and caution. I had learned to trust my instincts about people, to look for kindness rather than just strength, to value respect over dominance. Our courtship was unhurried and respectful. Sam never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never tried to control my decisions. When he proposed marriage 2 years later, it was with the understanding that we were partners joining our lives together. Our wedding was small and joyful, attended by Margaret, Sarge, Ruth, and close friends we had gathered around us like a chosen family. 20 years passed quickly. The bookstore thrived, becoming an integral part of the Ann Arbor community. Clara graduated from the University of Michigan and found work designing bridges, while Grace became a counselor specializing in domestic violence survivors. Both young women grew into strong, independent adults who chose partners who respected and supported them. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. The voice on the other end was older and rougher than I remembered, but unmistakably Vincent, my son, now 31 years old and calling me for the first time in over 2 decades. His voice shook as he explained that he was in jail, arrested for domestic violence after beating his girlfriend badly enough to send her to the hospital. He needed bail money. As Vincent spoke, I could hear echoes of the boy who had swung that cast-iron skillet at my head all those years ago. His words were apologetic, but entitled. He explained that the situation had gotten out of hand, that his girlfriend had pushed him too far, that he wasn't really a violent person, but sometimes women just didn't understand how to behave properly. I listened to my son explain why his violence was justified, why his victim deserved what she got. I heard Arthur's voice coming through Vincent's mouth, the same twisted logic that painted men as victims of women's unreasonable expectations. When Vincent finished his plea, I sat quietly for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the bookstore window. Sam was helping a customer find a cookbook, his voice patient and kind. Clara was reorganizing the display of new fiction, humming softly. This was my life now, surrounded by love and respect. "Vincent," I finally said, my voice steady and calm. "I haven't heard from you in 20 years. In all that time, you never once tried to contact me to ask how I was doing, whether I was safe, whether I needed anything. The only time you think to reach out is when you need something from me, when your choices have led you into trouble. I've built a good life here, Vincent. A life based on kindness and respect, and the understanding that love doesn't require dominance or control. I've raised your sisters to be strong, independent women who chose partners who cherish them rather than hurt them. I've learned to value myself enough to walk away from people who treat me badly, whether they're family or strangers. The money you want represents weeks of work at the bookstore Sam and I built together. It represents the security I've created for myself after years of having none. But more than that, it represents a choice about what kind of behavior I'm willing to support and enable." Vincent was crying now, promising he had changed, swearing he would never hurt anyone again if I would just help him this one time. His words were almost identical to the promises Frank used to make after each beating. The same cycle of violence and remorse and manipulation. "I'm sorry you're in pain, Vincent," I told him. And I meant it. "I'm sorry your life has led you to this point. But the choices that brought you here were yours to make. And the consequences are yours to face. I won't be sending money. And I won't be visiting. If you ever decide you want to do the hard work of becoming a different kind of man, someone who treats women with respect, then maybe we can have a conversation about rebuilding a relationship. Until then, I wish you well, but I can't be part of your life." I hung up the phone gently, my hands steady, despite the emotional earthquake Vincent's call had triggered. Through the office doorway, I could see Sam arranging a display of poetry books. He looked up and met my eyes, offering the kind of smile that had sustained me through 2 decades of healing and growth. That evening, Sam and I walked through the university campus as we had done countless times before. I told him about Vincent's call, about the strange mixture of sadness and relief I felt at finally closing that door completely. Sam listened without judgment, offering the kind of quiet support that had become the foundation of our partnership. I had learned that healing isn't a destination but a daily choice. A commitment to treating yourself with the same kindness you would show a dear friend. I had discovered that setting boundaries isn't selfish or cruel, but necessary for creating space where love can flourish without fear. Most importantly, I had found that it's never too late to rewrite your story, to walk away from roles that no longer serve you. My daughters are grown now, with children of their own who visit on weekends and holidays. They fill our house with laughter, their voices bright with the confidence of children who have never known fear in their own homes. These grandchildren will grow up knowing that love doesn't hurt, that families can be created as well as inherited, that strength comes from kindness rather than dominance. The bookstore remains the heart of our community, a place where ideas are shared and friendships are forged. Students come to me for advice about more than just books, seeking wisdom from someone who has navigated difficult passages and emerged stronger. I tell them what I wish someone had told me at their age: that you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept, that love should feel like coming home rather than walking on eggshells, that the people who truly care about you will support your growth rather than trying to keep you small. Sometimes young women ask me how I found the courage to leave such a dangerous situation. I tell them that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. I explain that I didn't have to become brave all at once, just brave enough for the next step. And then the next one after that. The path from victim to survivor to thriver isn't straight or smooth, but it's always worth walking. Each day brings small choices that either move you toward the life you want or keep you trapped in the one you're trying to escape. Sitting here on my porch as the sun sets over Ann Arbor, I am filled with gratitude for the journey that brought me home to myself. The woman who once believed she deserved nothing better than scraps of affection mixed with violence has been replaced by someone who knows her own worth and refuses to settle for less than genuine love and respect. My story isn't unique, but it is mine, and in the telling of it, I hope other women might recognize their own strength and possibility. We are all more resilient than we know, more deserving than we've been told, more capable than we've been allowed to believe. The life you dream of living is waiting for you on the other side of the decision to stop accepting less than you deserve. This is what victory looks like. Not revenge or dramatic confrontation, but the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, built on foundations of self-respect and genuine connection. The greatest gift I gave myself wasn't escape from a bad situation, but the courage to believe I deserved a good one, and then the persistence to create it. One careful choice at a time,